AP exclusive: Harris' call for reform collides with her past. Washington U. When Kamala Harris made her much-heralded arrival in Washington as California's first African-American U.S. Senator, she made a curious early decision. Within months of her swearing-in, she sponsored a bill urging states to eliminate cash bail, denouncing the system as a scourge on the poor and communities of color. That position would become a key part of her criminal justice reform platform. But her choice for now, Harris is casting herself as a progressive who consistently leveraged her power in the justice system to further civil rights causes and advocate for the disadvantaged. She has pledged but when she had a chance to take a bold stand on these issues as a top law enforcement officer, Harris often opted for a careful approach or defended the status quo. Observers of her career. Harris supporters say as a prosecutor she was tasked with upholding the law and, as Attorney General, defending the state, not making policy. She had limited everyone. Simon said Harris worked to hire more people of color as prosecutors. In her first year, but in many cases throughout her career, Harris embraced the traditional role of prosecutor. Her office defended wrongful convictions, fighting to keep behind bars those who judges determined should go free. She refused to, in response to critics who pushed her to use her power in the courts to usher in change, she told the New York Times in 2016, Harris says she would call for a federal moratorium on the death penalty if elected president. Harris' law enforcement approach has at times put her out of step with California's activist community. When she pushed the program has since become a source of tension with criminal justice advocates, who see it as a sign of Harris' outdated approach to dealing with problems that stem from poverty. In a recent NPR interview, Harris said her truancy initiative was not designed to punish vulnerable families, but But Harris' legacy remains on the state's books. She authored a statewide truancy law modeled after her San Francisco program. It has resulted in Harris' approach at the time was considered smart politics for a politician seeking to run statewide. Throughout her career, as Harris transitioned from law enforcement to legislating, the politics of criminal justice issues were changing fast. The deaths of unarmed black men at the hands of police in 2014 and 2015 prompted outcry and spawned the Black Lives Matter movement. Democrats began. Harris' views appear to have been changing, too. In 2014, she was opposed to legalizing recreational marijuana, and when she ran against a Republican challenger for re-election as Attorney General, she took the more conservative view he wanted to legalize. Harris laughed at but Harris' public tone changed as speculation grew about her running for president in 2020. Last month, she went as far as acknowledging to a pair of morning radio hosts that she's used recreational marijuana. For Ron Gold, the Republican who ran against her in 2014 and who supported recreational legalization when she did not, Harris' stance on marijuana is indicative of her tendency to take a position that's. Some see a similar pattern when it comes to the call for bail reform. Shortly after announcing her presidential bid in January, Harris declared on Twitter this. 3 years earlier, Harris' office was defending cash bail in a federal case. Neither. Harris appears to have shifted her stance 10 months later. In December of Still, she asked the judge to toss the case, arguing that the laws were constitutional even if the way some counties implemented those laws was not. The move perplexed bail reform advocates who say she could have used her position of power to do more as the top law enforcement official in the state, overseeing thousands of prosecutors who each day requested cash bail for those they charged with crimes. Harris' campaign declined to answer questions about when and why Harris' views on marijuana and bail reform shifted. Campaign spokesman Ian Sams noted the political arena, not the courtroom, is the appropriate place to address policy problems. As Simon, the civil rights advocate who worked with Harris, said she often say Harris spoke, privately, in frustration about cash bail and other elements of the criminal justice system while she was a prosecutor. But still, prosecutors. Advocates say they're cautiously optimistic about Harris' legislative efforts, and are glad to see the issue in the political spotlight. But they note her bill. Raffling said Harris' office has been receptive to feedback. Still, he's
Raindrop, drop top, smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park pot.